A couple years ago, I was chief learning officer before I was, quote, chief Envisioner. And the interesting thing happened one day when I got a phone call. This phone call was from this manager. And the manager says, Dan, are you in the building? I happened to be that day in the building. Fantastic. He's like, could you come up here? I got a situation. So it's about 9 o'clock. I go upstairs, right? I go down the hallway. I meet Mike, name withheld. He's like, can you come with me for a second? So we walk down the hallway. We pass about 6 cubicles. He stops. He says, look, over there. So I look, and I see this young gentleman. He's about 25-ish. And Mike says, huh? Huh? Beside this young gentleman was his mother. And so this was his first day of work, and he brought his mother to help him set up his cubicle for his first day on the job. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not a good start for your first day at work. And then there's Markieff Morris. He's a basketball player for the Phoenix Suns, and he has been so since 2011. So if you're not a basketball fan, that's fine. But this past December, he was feeling a bit bad, a bit forlorn. His twin brother, a couple months prior, was traded away from the Phoenix Suns. And so during a game in December, he walked past his coach, Jeff Hornacek, got a towel, and threw it at him. And so the owner, Mr. Sarver of the Phoenix Suns, goes to the newspaper and starts interviewing, and he says, I'm not sure it's just the NBA. My whole view of the millennial culture is that they've a tough time dealing with setbacks. And he wasn't done, because he said, you know, our team, have had a number of setbacks this year, and they've taken a toll on us, but we haven't been resilient. Now let's look back to Apollo 13 for a second. So, you've got 3 men in space. No one cares about them anymore because Neil landed on the moon, right? So these 3 men, now something happened, right? It's not as though Captain Lovell phoned up and said, Mom, we have a problem. No, he had Houston. But then myriads of different men and women in Houston had to figure out how to bring these poor 3 gentlemen back from space instead of hurtling into the sun. And those 3 men had to figure out themselves also how to get out of this predicament. Like in Rothenburg, it's this medieval town in Germany that was from like 950. And so during World War II, John McCloy was the assistant general of essentially making sure that we took back Europe, thought to himself, you know what, I could obliterate Rothenburg like we're supposed to for the rest of Germany, or I could reach out to Major Toms on the German side and say, you know what, maybe we should work together, think outside the proverbial box, and preserve Rothenburg for future generations. And McCloy was given the honorable protectorate of Rothenburg. And today, if you've been, you should go. It's this wonderful, majestic medieval town that we get to experience. And then there's one of my favorites, Madonna. I mean, look at me. Madonna, Borderline, Lucky Star, right? These songs from the early 80s could have been the end of her. Like Martika, like Milli Vanilli. Like, who remembers Debbie Gibson? But Madonna had some traits that I want you to think about for the kids that we're developing for tomorrow. She had very key traits that help organizations today. Like my personal hero, Terry Fox. As a late teen, playing basketball for the Simon Fraser University, he was told that he had cancer in his right leg. And so what does he do? Gets it amputated. He says, no problem. I'll just run a marathon every day and raise money for cancer. No problem. No problem. So what's happening is that there's this status quo thinking. Let's continue to teach, or let's continue to produce skills of one color in a paint bucket. Yet the new reality of our organizations, the quote corporate world, is that we need to be able to paint in all the colors. And we need certain traits in which to do so. Because as the Chinese proverb suggests, do not confine your children to your own learning, for they were born in another time. Now, Let's look at the Fortune 500 for a second. If we're suggesting today that for organizations to thrive or survive, they must thrive, how many of the Fortune 500 companies in 1955 are left today? Would it surprise you that it's only 11%? Now, differently, let's ask the question, in 1955, if, as it was, the life expectancy for a firm was to be 75 years, what is it today? It's 15. So something ostensibly is happening. And even the US Bureau of Labor Statistics have been tracking this for decades. And they find that about half of all these new firms will survive 5 years or more, and about a third, about 10 years or more. But look at that first point, 5 years, then organizations do not survive. Now there's a problem. And of course, there's more problems ahead. We've got Robotville coming. We've got artificial intelligence. They're supposed to take over the world. And in fact, studies suggest that Deloitte, for example, 35% of all the jobs across the UK are going to disappear by 2035. In America, it's predicted, ironically, by the University of Oxford, 47%. And in the Australian peninsulas, 40%. That's about 5 million jobs are going to disappear. In fact, Andy McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson, in their book, brilliant book, The Second Machine Age, suggest there's an irony here. Yes, productivity is increasing through this artificial intelligence and robotics, but you know what? We're not creating jobs out of this. So, for example, in Asia, you can go to a restaurant now, and they will serve you beer with a robot, they'll take the beer away by a robot, and they might serve you pierogies by a chef that is a robot. It's happening. This is not a joke, right? Now, why you, Dan? Why do you care? Well, I started out as a high school teacher, 3 years. It was fantastic. Then I emigrated, if you will, to higher ed, spent 5 years in higher ed. And since 2002, I've been at rather large organizations observing what's going on with the new recruits and the reality of the corporate world. And I've seen a light. If TED is an idea worth spreading, I've got one I hope that you'll at least think about, if not agree with, going forward. So put it differently. Let's play tic-tac-toe for a second, right? If you're smart, well, I'm presuming you're smart, it ends up in a draw each and every time you play your opponent. But I want us to think that, in fact, there is no box, and that we can win if there are certain traits like Madonna that allow us to think that there is no box. So, what are we noticing, first of all? Well, what we're receiving at times, and this is a generality, but work with me, this need for concrete, well-defined tasks. Tell me what to do, tell me what to do, tell me what to do. And in fact, I believe that comes from a what's on the test mindset. Teaching to the test, teaching to the exam. Then, there's Instagram, the distraction by vanity. What'd you have for lunch today? Let's post it on Instagram. And then, of course, if you're not promoted within a month on the job, all hell breaks loose. And then lastly, this essence of inflexibility and this sort of lacking of imagination is actually compelling the issue inside of our organizations, notwithstanding the fact that good, smart people are inventing artificial intelligence and robotics. So people like Mary Egan are not dissimilar to me. She's a former SVP of Starbucks. And she said, you know what, this generation, millennials, is not as comfortable with figuring out what to do. In fact, excelling at any job is about doing the things you weren't asked to do. So, this is fun, right? Behavioral inadequacies, robots and artificial intelligence coming to rue the day, and this is an eerie and malign future. Wow, you're really impressive, Dan. Thanks a lot for coming out. I feel horrible. Okay, well, let's get to what we're looking for. What do we need from graduates in order to thrive? 3 key traits. First of all, resiliency. We want the plants to blossom through the concrete. Second, we want graduates to be open to change. In fact, there are 4 seasons, not 1. And lastly, we want Edward Scissorhands in our organizations. We want them to be creative. So when you combine resiliency, openness to change, creativity, you have a thriving organization. Like all of these fine firms that continue to be on Fortune 500. They're hiring these types of people, but their cultures are inculcating this type of behavior as well. Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, a very famous academic, is in fact tweeting about resiliency. She says, surprises are the new normal. Resilience is the new key. Jason Karp runs a venture capital firm. You know what he says? He says, this is what we're hiring: openness to change and resiliency. It's a venture capital firm. Academics are weighing in on this, like the wonderful TED by Angela Lee Duckworth and her research. Grit is something about you thinking about the future and staying to it. Organizations need these types of people demonstrating grit in the organization, thus the organization can have resilience over time. Other academics, like Dr. Pontefract, says, and research this, combining openness with effort are actually the biggest influences on success in the organization. And other academics have found that actually this openness to change helps you later in life with your cognitive abilities. And lastly, on the creativity side, well, you know what? For us, that biggest impact on what we call profitability and market share is indeed creativity. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road. On the y-axis, we've got the 3 traits. And so the level of depth goes up, and over time, we have what happens with productivity. So no matter what, in any organization, there are going to be disruptions. Oil prices, 2008 collapse, etc. And then there's a post-disruption phase. The employee who has a really high level of resiliency, openness to change, and creativity will be stuttered a bit, but they come back and they help the organization, and they actually are productive more so than ever. Employee B, with less of the traits, stutters and takes longer to recover and may not actually come back to that full threshold. But most importantly, if we receive employees who have a very low level of these traits, that's when problems seem to occur in our organizations. That's when we get the new employee bringing his mom to work on day 1. So in conclusion, it is not just about Maslow's new 6th level called the internet and bringing Twitter and Facebook and Instagram to the work world. It is not. And for those of you that do know me, I am a tech guy. But it is not just about the tech. For all the new tech that we have out there in the schools or in the organizations, this is not what we're after. This comes. And God bless, the robots are coming too, so no matter what, we just got to be ready for them. Let me give you an example. So when I was at the British Columbia Institute of Technology, we had a 1-year program called ITP, Information Technology Professional. The average age was about 30 years old of the constituents. And for the 1 year, they ran a simulated company. It was called Millennium Corporation, if you can believe it. Now, at about week 3, they got a notice from the fake headquarters. And the notice was, be prepared to stay late tomorrow. It happens. It's the corporate world. Now, at 4 o'clock, what happened was each of them had their own laptop. The network went down, and their machines got wiped clean. And the order from headquarters was, terminal virus, you must put the network back together. We don't care how long it takes. Some classes would be there till midnight, 2 in the morning. They hated us the next day, of course, right? Because we did it on a Wednesday. But what were we doing there? We were teaching resilience, openness, and creativity. As much as they hated us, years later they came back and said, thank you for that type of experiential learning. And in essence, it was about this. We were encouraging failure, for it ensures real-world learning. Maybe put differently, more famously, Lao Tzu says, if you tell me, I'll listen. If you show me, I'll see. But if you let me experience, I'll learn. And I want that experience coming through resiliency, openness to change, and creativity. Like in China, where these days they have texting lanes. Who would have thought it, right? I mean, seriously. It's amazing. Talk about no box, right? Or in other parts of Asia, there are boat schools. These kids who cannot get off of the area in which they live, there are no roads, they built solar-paneled boat schools so that the boats come to the kids, and that's where they learn. Now that's those 3 traits I refer to. Now, in summary, let us think about the goodness that Terry Fox and Madonna and McCloy and Toms and the 3 astronauts led by Lovell in space. Think of what they brought to the equation. Think how our kids could potentially use these skills to help what my new world is, the organizations. And the organization's purpose, by the way, is to serve society. So we need resilient, open-minded, creative kids. What organizations want is this. I'm not teaching you how to do it today. I'm teaching you what we want. But actually, over the last 16 minutes or so, I've realized it's not a want. It's a need. And I thank you.